All right, so I guess you could say I was in some ways inspired by Tyson's last update crypto market video. I kind of wanted to take my own swing at this, and this is more from a perspective of, let's just say, traditional finance. In this example, extremely traditional finance. And that's what's going on with everyone's favorite, the housing market. And it's funny because I'm talking about it from an American perspective. And yes, it's dire here. Affordability for houses is in a rough place. But when I look at our northern neighbors, for instance, Canada, talk about places like Australia. So a few people I talked to overseas in the UK, homeownership is just difficult globally, really. It's hard to find pockets to really make it worthwhile, especially with disparities between your wages and the affordability of a living space, whether that be rent or a mortgage. So it's tough out there. There's no lie about that. But no matter how bad it's getting in America, I look at other countries as more of a signpost. I say to myself, oh, well, it's not as bad as, Canada and their housing crisis over there, which is out of control, especially when you look at places like Toronto. But those are kind of weather vanes. And I think they're pointing in the direction that America itself is heading now when it comes to its real estate market and the crunch that's going on there. So I'm going to jump into, why I think we're in this position. And some of those reasons are natural. And then a few of the things I've kind of worked out in my head on how to get out that I think are a little bit unconventional. I don't see mentioned as much. You probably have around, but I don't think it's talked about enough. Some of the ideas I might have to move us out of this situation. And, why would you listen to me? I've owned a few houses and sold a few houses. I'm pretty attuned to the process. It's harrowing. I think a lot of the things that millennials forget or they don't realize is owning a house isn't fun. Owning a house isn't fun. Taking care of one, especially if it's older. I think if you're young right now and you're renting and you're dreaming of owning your own house, I think you should realize that it's really not all that bad having to worry about nothing in your living space and just improving your life. Because your days look a lot different when you own a place as compared to when you're renting one. When you're renting one, you're running out the door. You're doing whatever you want. You got nothing to worry about. I don't care if my dishwasher explodes or my fridge falls over, which isn't a thing, but it could be. As compared to when you have a house, well, who knows? You could be stuck there for an entire day with a plumber because some pipe busted because it wasn't fast enough, or it's not PVC yet, and it's a metal pipe, and those are vulnerable to events like that. So just a quick disclaimer for everyone who's really hungry to get into this market. Just enjoy where your life is at and enjoy where you are presently instead of pining for what's next, because when you have to worry about nothing in your living space, that means you could focus on other parts of your life that maybe you can if you were distracted by something else. So I wouldn't take your current situation for granted if you're renting, you're trying to get into a place. But as far as getting into a place, why are we here? Why is the housing market so difficult to get into these days? I'd say, and just from observation and because I got a place in that time period as well, it's the interest rates. It really was the interest rates. When you put in cataclysmically low interest rates of sub 3% on mortgages when you're purchasing a house, you could be making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, put 3% down. You are now in the realm of a homeowner. You can now own a home. So during the crash of 2008, 2009, which some of you may not remember, houses saw a extreme drop in value. When I say extreme, I say 10 to 20%. Some people make it out like it was a 50% drop, 60. No one, your house lost all its value, and people really didn't make out. If you owned a house in 2009 and it lost all of its value, you've got it all back by now. And way more. So let's just dispel the myth that houses can reach these points of being so devalued to the point where it's not worth it to own them. We've fully recovered from the '09 crash, and we were still kind of in the final phases of a complete decade-long recovery when these interest rates came into effect. When these 3% interest rates came into effect, we were still kind of coming off those 2009, 2010 lows that we saw in the housing market. So houses were still affordable from that perspective, from a price perspective. So when you match up the fact that houses were still affordable from their total price, we'll say $300,000, $400,000, and you couple a 3%, which mortgage rate sub 3% that hasn't been seen since Roman times, some would say, you have a whirlwind of an opportunity to attract not only residential homeowners, but companies, rental speculators, which is just, I won't dive further. That could be a nomenclature for something else. Draw your own conclusion, but we'll just say rental speculators and anyone else who really kind of wants to either get into the housing market as a place to live or make some money off of it. So when you couple those two things together, boom, housing prices insanely high. So what happens when you have a generation upon generations, old, young, couples, baby boomers, all buying houses in this 2020 whirlwind? You have people locking into interest rates that they're not going to want to get out of for quite some time. And one of the small solutions that people like to bring up is, well, we need to build our way out of this. We can build more homes, and once we build more homes, the supply will come back up. It's extremely expensive to build anything right now. I don't know if you haven't noticed, but your typical contractor gets paid more than an office worker now, if not double, and they're retiring by age 40. Yeah, it damages your knees, but labor cost is incredibly expensive. So when you have a lack of development, which happened over COVID as a byproduct partially because of COVID, coupled with high interest rates and people not wanting to get out of their 3% mortgages, you're going to have a choke like you have never seen before in supply in the housing market. And it is unhealthy. It is incredibly unhealthy. Not only that, but this is my favorite one. And, there's always someone to blame in some of these instances. If you take all of that and couple it with the fact that there are extremely wealthy homeowners above the age of 40, we'll say 50, 60, who want to downsize out of their homes, they, when selling their old homes, can buy their new homes in cash. I've seen it myself. I sold a house where I had a cash offer right away, and I held out for I held out for someone that I felt like truly wanted and needed this home. A little bit of financial altruism to make me feel good about myself, but I think there's a lot of people who really, really took advantage of their positions within aging into a market, being able to take that equity and using it to buy houses in cash. And that's before you even get to companies like, which I think is overblown, people like BlackRock and large development firms buying out residential homes, Zillow buying out residential firms. Not like this wasn't happening, but I don't think it was the primary catalyst for this extreme choke in not only housing, but other avenues of investment. So I think that this kind of all just coupled together. And now we've created this really low supply choke, and it's kind of like a standoff between buyers and sellers now. So it's really like, okay, well, I'm not going to get out of my house. And buyers are saying, well, I need to get into a house. So there's been sort of a barrier to entry going on that's really created some general overall issues for the housing market as a whole. So we're in it. We're in this for quite some time, because these people that have locked into these 3% loans, they're not going to be moving for a while. They don't care if they live in a rundown shack. They're going to hang out in that 3% starter home for another 10 years. Because one, they haven't built enough equity yet. And two, why would you give up this interest rate? Why would you give up a 3% mortgage interest rate? And people who are getting into the market, I haven't mentioned yet, but the mortgage interest rate where we're at now is at 7 to 8%. People are trying to get in at rates like that, think they can refinance, and it'll get lower at 3 to 4% over time. There's no guarantee for that. And in the meantime, that means housing prices will increase. I think it's an inverse relationship, or I would say in tandem, right? So when mortgage rates go down, housing prices go up. I mean, it's pretty simple as that. And unfortunately, the inverse isn't there. When mortgage rates go up, housing prices stay about the same. They don't just drastically decrease. Maybe in some extreme areas you're seeing, city type areas, San Francisco or New York City, you'll see these fluctuations where maybe things were vastly overpriced and now they come down, there's some cuts. Really hot areas, not literally, sorry. But yeah, in this instance, hot areas like Arizona, you saw some incredibly overpriced, high cost of living changes to real estate market prices there. And there have been some cuts, but these are fluctuating wild areas, So how long will this be going on? And I think it'll be another 5 to 10 years before housing affordability is properly addressed, properly changed. Maybe there'll be some kind of give in the direction of buyers that can give them more purchasing power to kind of move forward and gain entry into the market. I think something that people forget wild. I don't know why this is never mentioned, but people say they just assume there'll be another 08-09 crash. There'll be another subprime mortgage crisis that'll happen again at some point. But the truth is, there was an extreme depraved job market at the time of 08-09. It wasn't that housing prices fell for no reason. Tons and tons and tons of people were laid off. I mean, the unemployment rate was far and above 10%. I don't know if it ever tapped 20, but it was up there. We don't have an unemployment crisis in this country. Even through Trump's administration and even through Biden's administration, we've had incredible unemployment numbers, great low unemployment numbers. Are people getting paid what they're worth? That can be argued. Do people have purchasing power? Probably not as good as they did 7 or 8 years ago, but are they employed? Can they pay their rent or their mortgage? And are they employed? They're not just, making $30,000 a year and buying $500,000 houses, which kind of was the case during the 08-09 crisis. Okay, no, they're not doing that because they're gainfully employed. And honestly, it's a bit of a competitive job market right now, too. I know there was a giant shuffle going on during COVID that created some increased competition between companies. I mean, I left company myself for a better paying job during COVID. So I completely understand the struggle. But I'll just, I think one of the things I kind of left out earlier of some other reasons we are like this, talking about COVID kind of reminded me, is relocation. I think that COVID drove people to a lot of different areas. And I'm not talking about, wealthy New Yorkers going down to Florida. Well, I guess in a way I am kind of talking about that. But maybe people looking for perceived biological freedoms in some way going to other states, and that would explain a Florida exodus. But it's not only that. It's people leaving really, and this is proven through U-Haul records, which I think is an interesting way to track exoduses in and out of states. California was leading the pack in people leaving the state, and COVID had some to do with it, or a lot. But housing affordability and just affordability in general has really been killing that area for a while, and I think COVID was the final death blow. If you're selling a house in California, let's just say a 3-bedroom in a decent part near the coast on California is, probably 7 figures. Probably going to be $1 million. That same house in Pennsylvania is not going to be $1 million. It might be $400,000, we'll say. So there were people who sold their houses in super high cost of living areas, and with that equity, they could buy a house cash elsewhere in another state, start a new life, not have to worry about having a payment or having a very low mortgage payment. And that I've seen that with my own eyes. I've seen that right in front of me. I've seen a lot of New Yorkers kind of enmesh themselves, like the diaspora of rats that they are, going into different states after selling their high value real estate and using that money to buy something of lower value and having less to worry about, more purchasing power with their jobs, which are now because of COVID, work from home. And I think work from home really had a huge effect on the real estate industry that has yet to be realized, especially when people are going to start being called back to offices. And to be honest, and this is me speaking personally, I don't think people are ever going to be forced, at least in office tech jobs, to go into work 5 times a week. It's actually one of the things people talk about when they talk about jobs now. It used to be like, oh, how's your boss? How's the work you're doing? Now it's, well, how often they make you go in? How often you have to go in? And if you have to go in 3 days a week, people are like, oh, okay, sorry to hear that. I only go in once a week, and that's only because it helps me concentrate, you know? So that's another huge piece of this puzzle that wasn't there in 08 and 09 when the home prices crashed. So we've seen appreciation of housing prices go up. We'll just say, and I'm just guessing here, I don't want to go purely off the numbers. We'll just say a home's value has increased about 50% since 2020. That might be a little too generous. We'll just say like a lot of home values have gone up 20, 30, 40, most cases 30 to 40% since 2019, 2020, which is incredible. So even in 08, 09 style, world-ending economic meltdown happening again would still not revert homes back to the prices they were pre-2021, 2020. It would take a lot more than that. And at that point, in order to get homes back to that point, you're not going to be caring about the housing market anymore. You're going to be caring about your family, your job, your well-being, eating. You're going to care about a lot of things. So, that aren't housing, because in order for housing prices to go down another 30 to 40%, something truly dire needs to happen. I think it'll be more of an example of raising interest rates or keeping interest rates where they are now on mortgages to kind of freeze housing prices, and then the value of the dollar or people's wages kind of catch up to that. You know, I think we're looking to try and find a normalization of housing prices, or do some price discovery to see where the American dollar and where the average American worker can fit into housing prices, and what's kind of a comforting mold that can go into the typical costs that go into being, you know, let's just say a month to month American, and making ends meet on food and housing and leisure, travel, things like that. So I think that's kind of where we're in, kind of a soul searching era for housing. And you know what? This is a whole nother episode in itself, so I won't go too hard on this point, and you could kind of make out some of it in your mind, but we've moved from you used to be, and this is why I don't take it easy on boomers in a lot of instances. We moved from being a single income, 2 to 3 child, 2 car, 1 vacation a year with a home economy to a couple, both working, 1 to 2 kids, 1 car in a lot of instances type of economy. We've fully integrated both genders into the workforce to the point where there's no longer a sole provider for a house. This has weakened our dollar. It's strengthened corporate interests. And I think housing prices are reflecting growing pains into a dual income economy. A lot of prices used to reflect single income homes. Well, now they reflect something completely different. They reflect dual income homes. And if you want to get into the benefits of having a dual income economy and who that helps in the long run, if you've listened to the show before, you know, you can make your own inferences on what I think about that. But let's just say one thing it's been devastating for is general affordability in the housing market. And I think when people say, oh man, why is rent so much, or why is housing so much? And something I really noticed in the suburbs, rent is crazy compared to major cities, because couples want to get into the suburbs, have kids. If they can get a 1-bedroom, they're splitting the rent on it. I think rental companies have realized this, so they price the rent for people making dual income, young couples out of college, people like that. Not for single people who are running in and trying to rent out and kind of get themselves into an area, meet that special someone, you know. And it's not like that anymore. These are rental and home prices prepared for dual income couples. So that's something to also keep in mind. And that's before you even get to the corporate interests like BlackRock and Zillowmania and everything else that I actually think is just, it's exaggerated, the impact that has on the market. But I'll tell you what, checking Redfin constantly and Zillow, that is an addiction that a lot of adults have. And I myself find myself hanging out on there from time to time. You're like, what are you even doing? So what, you're going to move there wherever you're looking at right now? No, it's an unhealthy addiction that people have with it. So I think we got a good idea of why we're in this situation. So I want to kind of get us an idea of how we can get out of it. And these are some things that I thought up personally. I haven't really done my homework on them. So if you're interested, Google around. Let me know what you think in the comments about any of them. But one that came to me recently that I think is interesting is, we complain about some suburban towns just being overloaded with boomers or people who have kind of ingratiated themselves in the communities over the last few decades. A lot of people can't afford to grow up or buy a home in their hometown anymore, even if their hometown isn't a particular upper middle class one or middle upper class one. Now it's a bit different. So I think a solution to this is that millennials or young home buyers need to start looking at revitalizing cities where there is no pulse really, and make their own. So for instance, you got a city that's 20 minutes outside of, we'll just say Washington, D.C. Don't take it literally. I'm sure houses are still very expensive 20 minutes out of Washington, D.C. That goes without saying. But let's just say you got a home 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. It's extremely expensive. What can you do about it? You can't move in there. You're priced out. It's overloaded with people who are 40 plus who have been there for years. Okay. What happens when 20 to 30 to 35-year-olds look at moving into cities that are 40 minutes, 50 minutes from Washington, D.C.? And at that point, they're kind of pushing, they're kind of going into these dead or middle class communities or lower middle class communities and kind of livening them up, rebuilding a downtown area and getting homes for, instead of $500,000 and barely being able to make ends meet, they get a home for $200,000 to $300,000. And this vitality that'll be brought from this younger presence into these towns, these affordable towns, it'll kind of reinvigorate them. It'll reinvigorate them. So I think that's something that people need to think about, is kind of sacrificing these towns that they've known to love their whole life, but are priced out of, and kind of go forge a new path elsewhere. I know someone who, during COVID, big city person, Brooklynite, went and bought a house in a very rural area and found a few other people who did the same thing as well. And they're kind of building their own affordable communities. And maybe those towns someday, let's just say the town that's 40 minutes from DC, is going to be just as nice and sought after as the town that's 20 minutes from DC. I think that's a really interesting way to create opportunity, because strictly speaking, in the US, there's tons of untapped room. And I'm not talking about, go buy a duplex in the middle of nowhere in Ohio. I'm saying you can get 50 minutes from major cities and find really affordable homes. I just don't think people are honing in on that enough, because the communities are lackadaisical, or it's viewed as kind of in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, okay, those are fair arguments, but maybe if you get a bunch of like-minded people in these areas and they're a little bit more affordable, it can make some sense. It can make some sense, and you can create something new instead of trying to relive your young life in these boomer communities, that a lot of people aren't able to get into anymore. So that's something that I kind of thought up on my own. I always thought that was interesting. And then something else, and it sounds goofy at first, but it kind of is making lemons out of lemonade with what happened with COVID. So everyone knows that office real estate is dead. It's dead as a doornail. It's not easy to get an office, right? It's not easy to lease out an office. I mean, you've seen it. If you've been on a local route around where you live, you'll see these large, realtor office buildings that are just sitting there vacant. Maybe see some flickering lights in there. This, to me, is a completely untapped opportunity and kind of a transfer of let's just say purchasing power, or an opportunity to kind of move from office to residential in any of these buildings. So, something funny would be you can make office lofts out of them. So instead of each floor being, drab cubicles, they're lofts. There's hallways and bedrooms and apartments and condominiums. I think that would be a great thing to do. The problem is that the difficulty of changing an office use space to a residential use space requires extreme amounts of permitting. That involves township action, obviously changing hands between most likely a commercial real estate interest to a residential interest. That probably takes a lot of work too. But there's tons of untapped real estate that could really be making money off of residential use. And if the government could kind of jump in and cut that red tape that might exist between these two parties of residential and commercial for office spaces, that's opening the door for tons of development opportunity. I could totally see these office buildings getting turned into like really swanky young couple apartment buildings, and they can joke about it too. They can be like, oh yeah, we're in that, office conversion, right? How many office conversions do you see? How many have you heard about? Not a lot. They should really get moving on those. I think that's a really huge untapped opportunity, because especially when you go through, and that kind of plays into my first point about creating new local communities. You have dead office communities, these ornate, I don't want to say ornate, we'll just say drab office buildings with thoughtfully brutalist architecture sitting on hills doing nothing. Do something about them. Knock them down and make a residential use, or put a really interesting modern residential use inside of these buildings. They already have water fountains and, escalators in some instances, elevators. They already have a lot of the infrastructure needed for that kind of built into them. I think that's totally something to think about. But whatever red tape is out there for that, I'm sure you could find it fairly quickly. But it's a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis, so that would kind of call for something to really remedy this problem that the country's kind of finding itself in right now. So another one that I haven't been thinking of, I just read it everywhere, and I'm not really apt on this, is that we can build our way out of this problem. Just building new residential communities and neighborhoods. And yeah, I've seen a lot more development in the past few years, which is great, but not enough. Not enough. Labor's too expensive. It takes too long. There's not enough open land, especially around areas of interest. But theoretically, when you're building new developments, you are creating new supply, and that's kind of halting these choked increased housing prices that are everywhere. So if you want to be able to build out these spaces more efficiently and make work, let's just say bids or permitting work or construction expenses more affordable for developers, you need to offer incentive to these developers. Maybe tax credits. That's what they use for public housing. They have tax credit sites where, you'll go out and build a community, but it'll look like effective altruism, but when you do it, you receive these massive tax credits for your company from the government. You build them a neighborhood or help them fund a neighborhood, you get a giant tax credit that benefits you. And then people get affordable housing. It's a win-win. So I think we should kind of take that model and apply it to just normal everyday residential housing to kind of speed it up, boost people's ability to get development going. I think that would be pretty useful. That would be pretty useful, because we all know that building out of this is a great possibility, but it's just going to take a while, and it's not easy. It's expensive these days. It's expensive for labor. So one more I got on me, and this is extreme. I don't know. This might make me a socialist or a communist. I don't. This is an example of socialism, but I've noticed, man. I'm trying. I've resisted being political for this because I do think that housing is a problem that affects everyone regardless of their affiliation. But I love to see the right kind of crow, the political right crow about community and housing affordability and how it just isn't like it used to be in your old town because of, let's just say migration or something. And, there are ways to fix that. And one thing they love to say is that housing's just become too expensive. How can a normal middle class family afford to live paycheck to paycheck anymore? How they can't do this anymore. We need to do something about housing. It's just so expensive now. Unfortunately, these housing prices are a byproduct of unfettered capitalism. I mean, there aren't enough regulations on the housing market to make sure that it functions solely for residential users and living as residents of homes instead of speculating on homes. When people were buying houses, let's just say around World War II time, I don't know, we'll say 50s, who knows, somewhere around that era. Do you think people were trying to, we'll go back to the guy in the factory who could buy a home on a single income back in the day, let's just say in the 50s or 60s. Do you think he was looking at his house that he was buying for his wife and 2 or 3 kids as some sort of long-term speculative investment? He was looking for a home to raise a family in. That's what was most important to him. So I think, look, obviously that's a guess, but I like to believe that's the case. So what we really need to do is lobby for the government to create legislation that really targets in on the idea of homes being used for families to live in. Yes, they can have value. Yes, you can speculate on them. Yes, it's important. But I think you'd have to be an idiot to not see there has been a complete gamification of the real estate market with the advent of Zillow, Redfin, and corporate interest. And not only just corporate interest, successful residential speculative interest. So I think something that the government could do is put a cap on the amount of properties that someone can own and rent out to people. So we're not stuck with magnates who are owning large swaths of communities and renting them out to people, or there should be super, invasive regulation on speculating within the real estate market and kind of focus it more on, okay, what can we do legislation wise to make sure that people who want to have families, conservative talking point, are able to afford homes. And some people would say, well, you can't have that. That's invading a basic tenet of capitalism. It's like, okay, well, do you want families to have a place to grow up meaningfully with plenty of space? Or do you just want an unchecked real estate market that families are quickly finding out they can't buy their way into anymore because they're competing with people at much better income levels, corporations, or people who have already been in the real estate market for 20 to 30 years. How are you supposed to beat that raw purchasing power of them? So there needs to be something in effect where, first off, step one is make sure no corporation or LLC can buy a home. I'm sorry, residential use should be reserved for residents and people who intend to live and invest their own money via a mortgage into a home. That is where residential living should thrive. Now, if you want to talk about LLCs who develop a rental community, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, there has to be some sort of industrious opportunity there. But when you talk about single family homes, I think there should be a cap on how many one person can own, or there should be some sort of, I know the system that they already have in public housing is, okay, we have a 400 unit community. We need to make sure there are X amount of single mothers here. We need to make sure we have X amount of, 2-parent, 4-child families. They have a system for that in place already. And I know what your mind's kind of going there, and mine is too. Well, that means the government will dictate where people can live and where they can buy homes. I'm not saying it needs to be just this blanket that overarches the entire industry. Just simple laws that return, let's just say simple laws that make it so dual income, single income families are competing with dual income, single income families for other homes. And that's it. It's kind of creating a fairer competition. I'm not an analogy person at all, but let's just say there's a game of baseball where one person has to hit against, a pitcher that can throw a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And then when it's the other team's turn to hit, they get to just hit it off the tee. You know what I mean? That's the kind of housing market we're dealing with right now. People are going up against the fastest pitchers in the league, and then when it's the other team's turn, they just get to hit the ball off the tee, right? So we need to find a way to kind of make sure that it's it's a game. Obviously, it's a game. It's a fight. It's a battle between two incomes to purchase a home. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But make sure it's a fair game, and make sure for boxing, for instance, there's weight limit, there's weight distribution, something like that. You make sure you're not fighting someone that's an outsized weight, a featherweight versus a heavyweight, something like that. Just make sure it's just two featherweights going at it for each other for a 2-bedroom condo in a downtown somewhere. I think that I don't think that's crazy. I don't think that's insane. I think that's actually making capitalism more fair. So maybe just creating legislation that blocks out people who have already had success in the real estate industry in a residential sense. Maybe people that block them out. So, you already have a home in the suburbs, and you also have a vacation home at the shore. Maybe you don't get to buy another 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, or 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom or something as well on top of that, when you already, I don't want to say you already have everything that you need, but when that house could better be put to use with someone else's income to create a more thriving, newer community. But I think that's really ambitious on my part, a little bit speculative, unprovable, and some would say socialist. But I'm sorry, we're just going to end up like other countries. We're just going to end up like Canada in our housing market if we don't do something about it. And the only reason that we're able to stop and catch our breath right now is because interest rates are around 8%. Because interest rates are around 8%, 7% right now, housing prices are kind of on a freeze. They're not going down. Maybe seasonally they're going down a little bit, but they're probably going to get back at their standard, 2 to 5% value increases each year. We won't be seeing the 20, 30% increases that we have over the last 3 years because of COVID. And I got one more for you. This is a bonus round of how to get out. People love to say, vote with your wallet, or, take your money elsewhere. Vote with your feet. I don't even know. I don't even know if I'm making up that term, but you want to put it one way. If you're a family, you're renting a home, you're a family, you have an undersized home, you're a single guy, you got an undersized home and you want to move, you're renting and you want to buy a place. Whatever you're thinking of doing, just wait for another year. Just wait for another year. If everyone accepted, it's kind of like a strike of real estate buyers. If everyone unilaterally accepted these prices are too insane, I'm good with where I'm at for another year, you'll see price drops. Sellers will get a little desperate. Sellers get desperate when you leave their houses sitting for 30 days nowadays. If you leave their house sitting for 30 days, they get a little scared. They'll take a lower price. So I think that buyers need to realize that they do have some purchasing power. They do have some power to influence sellers. And they should kind of communally agree to that and say, hey, and whether that would be through some sort of informational program or signing a pledge, I will not buy something at these ridiculous prices for another year. There has to be some sort of communal buying strategy that would really that would really scare sellers, because you're seeing it in some vacation areas right now. People aren't, because of the lack of purchasing power in the economy you have right now because of inflation. Less people, let's just say, are buying second homes. Less people are buying vacation homes. You're seeing people get scared in those areas already. You're seeing sellers get scared in those areas already. And I like that. I'm a fan of that. So, but that's me being fanciful. People are always going to want to move to where they are, keep up with the Joneses, get a new place to live, upsize, downsize, whatever else. So that's just me being fanciful. But in a perfect world, if everyone agreed to just stop buying homes at these ridiculous prices for 1 year, just re-sign that lease for 1 more year. Live in your undersized house for 1 more year with your 2 kids. Sorry, you have to share a bathroom. But see what happens if you did that. So what would happen if everyone did that? It'd be interesting. It would be interesting. So, all right. I'm going to get out of it here. But, if you guys ever want to talk about any of this, feel free to drop anything in the comments. And, try and keep up with everything we're putting out these days. I hope Tyson does another crypto market update, because that music he had in the back last time was really it was relaxing. So, and maybe we'll get the both of us on at some point to do just overall economic discussion. How to be economically literate everywhere from real estate to crypto for 2024. How does that sound? I guess that doesn't sound too fun, but whatever. Until next time, it's Kid Moyer out. Have a good one, guys.